In lesson 3 of chapter 12, unemployment, we're going to look at unemployment at the macroeconomic level. In macro, the Keynesian aggregate demand, aggregate supply model is really a labor market model. When GDP is low, unemployment's high. When GDP is high, unemployment's low. So we're going to analyze this macroeconomic model with a focus on the unemployment level. All right. So we're going to assume the fiscal budget is balanced. That's just taxes that government collects equals the amount of spending the government engages in each year. And that the aggregate demand, short and aggregate supply, and potential GDP level are given below. Now, I've transferred that information to this Desmos model here. You can access the Desmos model here by clicking here, but you'll need to modify it so that your numbers match up over here, okay? You want these numbers over here, okay? So using Desmos, I can get the real GDP level, I can get the price level, and I can get what's called the output gap. Real short and aggregate supply is this flat line in the Keynesian model. And the reason why that is because the Keynesian model assumes prices are sticky. In the short run, they tend to not go up or down. And then aggregate demand is this downward sloping line. And then GDP should be equal to this vertical line. GDP is whatever this vertical line is at, right? So real GDP or potential GDP is 18.789. Potential GDP is a vertical line here. Long-run aggregate supply is a vertical line here because it equals the value of GDP, what it should be if the economy were at full employment. It doesn't matter what the prices are. If the price level is 2 million, potential GDP is going to be 18.789. If the price level were 15, potential GDP is going to be 18.789. If price level 0, potential GDP is going to be 18.789. Potential GDP does not depend on the price level. It is what it is, right? The real value of capital, land, resources, technology, the size of the labor force for the economy. It's the real value of all that stuff, right? And it happens to be 18.789 in my model. Now notice I have potential GDP as X equal. That's necessary because Desmos is a math model, capital Y, which represents GDP. That's the horizontal axis, right? And then the price level is the vertical axis. I have P over here instead of PL because if I write PL, Desmos thinks I'm multiplying P times L. So that is price level. This is price level. And that is real GDP. In actuality, it's real GDP when the economy is at full employment, also known as potential GDP. Equilibrium real GDP level in my model is 15.632. That's the intersection of short run aggregate supply in the Keynesian model and aggregate demand, right? The price level is 10.42. It's given to you right here, right? The slope of the Keynesian short run aggregate supply curve is 0. So this is a fancy way of saying 0. So the price level is just 1042. That's why it's a flat line here, right? And that's why I give it to you here. It's 1042. Now, the output gap is the difference in what GDP is. GDP is actually equal to 15.632. It's supposed to be 18.789. So there's an output gap here. And that output gap is a negative $3.157 trillion, right? $3.157 trillion. The fiscal budget is balanced. So the fiscal budget balance is equal to $0 trillion by assumption, right? The fiscal budget is balanced. So that means tax revenues that the government collects equals the government expenditures, right? In this situation, the unemployment rate is high because GDP is not where it should be. GDP is less than what it should be. When GDP is less than what it should be, then resources like labor are not fully utilized. So unemployment is greater than the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment includes structural unemployment and frictional unemployment. Those kinds of unemployment include the categories of people who left a job because they wanted to move to a new state, and now they're looking for work, right? They're not included in the unemployment rate, or they're not considered unemployed until they moved and start looking for work. Once they start looking for work, now they're unemployed again, right? Maybe they moved because they don't like tornadoes in the Midwest. Maybe they don't like hurricanes in the Southeast. Maybe they don't like earthquakes in California. So maybe they moved to Utah because they want to get away from all that stuff, right? And they moved to Utah because they also like skiing. Now, if their personal lives are better, right, for whatever reason, the amenities of an area, then they're going to be probably more productive at work, right? So this form of unemployment is a positive, right? Because that move results in them being more happy and therefore more productive once they get their new job. Now, the unemployment could have been caused by automation. So somebody in a factory has their job outsourced to technology, a robot or an AI. What does that person do? Well, that person is going to end up doing what? Maybe going back to college and learning a new job skill like data analytics or data science. And when that person graduates from college and starts looking for work, now they're considered unemployed, right? And that has increased the productivity of the United States. Why? Well, their previous job is being done by a robot. So when a robot takes that person's job, productivity of the economy probably increases because that robot is really productive, right? Maybe it's a repetitive job and it's boring to a human, so humans wouldn't be very productive in it. But for a robot that doesn't get bored, the productivity of that position where the work is being done by a robot now, that productivity goes up. Now, when that unemployed worker graduates and fills a job that firms have had a hard time hiring for, all of a sudden the firm's productivity goes up when that newly trained displaced worker gets a new job. So that kind of unemployment is good too. The bad kind of unemployment in a macroeconomic sense is cyclical. And cyclical unemployment is caused by recession. So there's three components of unemployment. Cyclical, which is caused by recession, natural and structural, structural and frictional. The sum of structural and frictional unemployment is the natural rate of unemployment. It's what we want the unemployment rate to be, right? It's the desired amount of unemployment, because that form of unemployment, like I said, is very productive. What we don't want is cyclical unemployment, right? That's when we have a recession. And that's why the unemployment rate is greater than the natural rate here, because we're in a recession. When you're in a recession, GDP is less than what it should be, okay? So let's go ahead and hit submit here. And we got all the answers correct, right? Now, politicians, policymakers, they want to push the economy back to full employment. Senators and representatives, maybe they end up compromising on a two-part fiscal stimulus, right? Instead, stage one, Congress is going to do what? Maybe they want to do something with government expenditures, right? So to increase overall expenditures in the economy, what can Congress do with its expenditures? Well, Keynesians want government to increase their expenditures to boost the economy. So Congress is going to pass a bunch of programs. Like in the Great Depression, it created all kinds of programs, which end up building, I guess, dams and the downtown of San Antonio, Texas, for example, right? Hoover stimulated the economy by authorizing the building of the Hoover Dam, right? Hoover Dam provided jobs for people, maybe when unemployment was high, but it also created power, which probably lowered the cost of electricity in the United States, right? So Congress will go out and do these projects to boost GDP, right? And in this one, we're going to choose an increase in government expenditure. And I give you the amount that government expenditures were increased by. They're increased by $0.6 trillion. Now, we're going to assume that the effect of increasing government expenditures by $0.6 trillion resulted in this new aggregate demand curve. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to put it down here. I'm going to delete everything but the P. Then I'm going to change the color to red to match the graph, right, in my open math. Okay, so this is the new aggregate demand curve. This was the initial aggregate demand curve, right? At the new equilibrium, remember, short and aggregate supply is perfectly elastic in the Keynesian model because prices are sticky, right? So the new equilibrium GDP level is determined by the intersection of this new aggregate demand curve and the perfectly elastic short and aggregate supply curve. And so GDP is now 17.211. We'll click submit to find out if we got it right. We got the increase right. So 17.211, right? The price level is still 10.42 because in the short run, Keynesians assume prices are sticky. They have no tendency to go up or down, right? Now, the output gap is smaller, right? The output gap is now, the GDP should be 18.789. With this fiscal stimulus, the output gap shrinks to negative 1.578, right? GDP is now on the red line, 17.211, and it should be 18.789. So there's a gap there, right? And that gap is still negative 1.578. Let me go ahead and hit submit here to make sure I got it right. So the gap, there's still a gap, but it's smaller. Now, initially, there was no fiscal budget deficit, right? The taxes that government collects equaled its expenditures, right? But now we have what? Government expenditures increased by 0.6. So suppose, for example, that, I don't know, government spending was 4 trillion and taxes were 4 trillion. This is our tax revenue and this is our government expenditures, right? The fiscal budget is balanced, which is why we have a fiscal budget balance of $0 here, right? But here we increase government expenditures by 0.6. So if government expenditures were, say, 4, and we increase it by 0.6 trillion, government expenditures are now $4.6 trillion, right? And so the deficit is the amount of the increase in government expenditures, $0.6 trillion. If this was positive, it'd be a budget surplus, but it's negative, it's a budget deficit. So the negative implies deficit. So we don't need to include the negative sign. We're going to type the 0.6, which is the amount of the increase in government expenditure, right? The unemployment rate is still too high. So the unemployment rate is still greater than the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment is the unemployment that is desired because it's productive. The government spending multiplier is with D being the difference, this is the change in government spending, right? This is the change in GDP. I'm going to divide the change in GDP by the change in government spending, right? The change in government spending, or the difference in GDP caused by a difference in government spending, that's the multiplier. right? And GDP increased from 15.632 to 17.211, right? So this right here is the new GDP level. What was the original GDP level? As I said, the original GDP level was what? 15.632, right? Right here, right? 15.632. The new GDP level is 17.211. So the increase in GDP is 1.579. That's the increase in GDP caused by the increase in government expenditure. Government expenditure increased by 0.6. The government spending multiplier is this ratio. And how do you calculate that ratio? It is equal to 2.63. This ratio is 2.63, right? So the government spending multiplier is 2.63. Now, what does that imply? What we're going to do is we're going to put it over 1. So what this says is a $1 increase in government spending is associated with a 2.63 increase in GDP, right? This right here is increase because this is positive and that's positive. So this is an increase in GDP and this is an increase in GDP. The increase in GDP is 2.63 for every $1 increase in government expenditures, right? So this number is going to be 2.63 here. Now we want to calculate the percent increase in GDP, right? GDP increased by what percent? GDP is 17.211. GDP was, prior to the increase in government spending, 15.632, right? To calculate the percent change, it's what it is after the increase in government spending to what it was before the increase in government spending. So it's what it is minus what it was divided by what it was multiplied by 100%, right? To convert it to a percentage. So GDP increased by 10.10%, right? And we'll see if we got these answers correct. What happened to the price level? Well, the price level didn't change, right? The price level was 10.42. It is 10.42. So 10.42 minus 10.42 is 0, divided by what it was, 10.42, 0, times 100, 0, right? So there's no inflation. So in the Keynesian model, fiscal policy has no inflationary consequence, right? So the price level changed by 0%, right? That's probably the best choice. Now, in stage 2, what does Congress do? It's going to affect taxes, right? If it raises taxes, that means consumers have less money in their pocket and their consumption is going to decline. If it reduces taxes, then consumers have more disposable income and they might spend some of that increase in their disposable income. So this is a cut in taxes by $0.964 trillion, right? And we're going to assume that results in this blue new aggregate demand curve, right? So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it into Desmos. I'm going to put it right below this red one, right? I got to get rid of the DAL, right? So I have my new aggregate demand curve. And notice it looks like it passes right through potential GDP and short and aggregate supply. So all three curves are intersecting right there, right? So it looks like this has closed the gap because now GDP is determined by where the blue aggregate demand curve crosses the flat short and aggregate supply curve. And it looks like GDP is now what it should be, 10.789. The price level was 10.42. The price level is 10.42, right? So before the increase in government spending, the price level is 10.42. After the increase in government spending, the price level is 10.42. And then after the cut in taxes, the price level is 10.42. So the price level doesn't change. Again, in the Keynesian model, prices are sticky. The output gap is closed, right? We've mentioned that. With the increase in government spending pushing us to here, and the increase in, or the cut in taxes pushing us to there, GDP is now 18.789, which equals potential GDP, right? So the gap is 0. Okay, let's go ahead and press submit to see if we got these answers right. I entered the value of real GDP incorrectly. It's 18.789, not 10.79. Let's try that again. All right, cool. Now, what happened to the fiscal budget deficit? We'll close this out and we'll close that out. Okay, so here is our fiscal deficit after the increase in government expenditure, right? We had a deficit of 0.6. We assumed that the initial deficit was 0 because, right, that's what happens when the fiscal budget is balanced. So we just assumed taxes are 4, government expenditure is 4, which means there is no deficit, no surplus. So that's why that is 0. But here we increase government expenditures by 0.6, right? So our deficit shot up to 0.6 trillion, right? It shot up to 0.6 trillion. But now we have a tax cut. We have a tax cut of what? 0.967. Our initial taxes were 4. Our initial government spending was 4, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to cut our taxes by the amount in the problem. So that right there says taxes are cut by 0.967. So our new deficit is 1.567. Now, what happened to the unemployment rate? With GDP equal to potential GDP, the output gap going to 0, our unemployment rate is now equal to the natural rate of unemployment, right? So the fiscal stimulus in this model closed the output gap and returned the unemployment rate to what it should be, right? Which is equal to the natural rate of unemployment, which is the sum of structural and frictional unemployment. So in this situation, cyclical unemployment is 0. Now, what about the tax cut multiplier? Taxes were cut by 0.967, right? So when you look at the tax cut multiplier, it's the change in GDP over the change in the taxes, right? The change in taxes, we cut taxes by 0.967, right? What happened to GDP? Well, the shift from black aggregate demand to red aggregate demand was caused by the increase in government expenditures. The shift from the red aggregate demand curve to the blue aggregate demand curve was caused by the cut in taxes. And so this is what GDP was on the red aggregate demand curve, and this is what GDP is on the blue aggregate demand curve. So on the red aggregate demand curve, GDP is 17.211, right? So this is what GDP was, 17.211. And this is what GDP is after the tax cut, 18.789. That value right there. So the increase in GDP is 1.578. That 1.578 increase in GDP is a result of the tax cut. So what is the value of this ratio? Negative 1.63. So the tax cut multiplier is 1.63. I think I need to make it negative, right? Now, what does this imply? Well, I'm going to put this negative 1.63 over 1 because negative 1.63 divided by 1 is negative 1.63, right? So what this says, and I'm going to move the negative sign down here. So 1.63 divided by negative 1 is a negative 1.63. So this is a $1 tax cut, right? This change or difference in taxes, this change in taxes is actually a decrease in taxes of 1, right? So for each $1 cut in taxes, GDP goes up by $1.63. And real GDP did in fact increase, right? It increased from 17.211 to 18.789 as a result of the tax cut. But we want to calculate the percent change, right? So this is what it is. This is what GDP is after the tax cut. And this is what it was before the tax cut, right? So the percent change in GDP is what GDP is after the tax cut minus what it was before the tax cut divided by what it was before the tax cut times 100 to convert it to a percentage. So we have 9.2. GDP increased by 9.2% because we're rounding it to one decimal place. The price level, again, did not change, right? The price level in the Keynesian model, prices are sticky. So the price level remained at 10.42, and it was 10.42. So the price level changed by 0%, right? Because again, prices are sticky in the Keynesian model by assumption, which makes the short average supply curve perfectly elastic.